What's up, Story Geeks? I'm going to talk about an article that came out in Empire Magazine. So our friends over at Empire Magazine, shout out to our friends at Empire, a bunch of whom have been on the podcast. They interviewed Chris Terrio about the Rise of Skywalker. And the question came up about who is Rey. This has been a question, from The Force Awakens on. It's been foreshadowed this whole time. And the writer in the interview says that the question will be answered not only literally, but also metaphorically. He goes on to say, again, this is Chris Terrio, how can Rey become the spiritual heir to the Jedi? We kept coming back to who is Rey and how can we give the most satisfying answer that is not only factually, because obviously people are interested in whether there's more to be learned of Rey's story, but more importantly, who is she as a character? How will she find the courage and will and inner strength and power to carry on what she's inherited? So yeah, that's a quote. That's a direct quote from him. I'm reading from his quote from Empire Magazine, from the review in Empire Magazine. And I thought we should chat about this in a daily journal. Who is Rey? Why does it matter? Why do we care? And what does it have to do with Star Wars? There's a lot to unpack there, but the first thing to unpack, and again, I'm going to approach this from a writer's standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint. I'm not going to get into ideology necessarily, although we can touch on that. But it is important for us to know Rey's identity because the story has demanded that they answer it. The storytellers, the brain trust at Disney, Star Wars, have told us that it's important that we know who Rey is. Why do we know that it's important that we know who Rey is? Well, internal to her character, she's very caught up with who she is. If you remember back to The Force Awakens, she did not want to leave Jakku. In fact, Finn kept getting so upset with everybody. Why does everybody want to go back to Jakku? And part of it for Rey is because she's still waiting for whoever left her with Unkar Plutt to come back to get her. So her identity is wrapped up in wherever she comes from. And that's probably true from a psychological standpoint in terms of, I have had friends who didn't know who their biological parents were, and they wanted to kind of explore that and figure that out and figure out where they've come from. It's something that we inherently want to know as part of our identity. Star Wars has told us it is important that we address this because it's important to Rey. And when it's important to our lead character, a character who we care a lot about, then it's important to the audience. And they keep deepening this mystery of where Rey is from, who Rey is, what could Rey actually be. So, and I think most people are interested in it. I haven't heard anybody that said, I don't really care where Rey comes from. I remember after reading some of the books that led up to The Force Awakens, and I remember thinking after I saw The Force Awakens that Rey was somehow going to be related to Luke Skywalker, because it was interesting to me to see that Luke could potentially have offspring. That was not something we would have seen from the Jedi Order of the prequels, but one of the things that was foreshadowed to us by the prequels was the damage that was done to Anakin by the lack of love he was able to feel and exchange, the lack of intimacy he was able to have with Padme. And I do believe that George Lucas got his story into a bit of a conundrum, because in the original trilogy, he very much is about this balance, this philosophy of balance. And even Yoda and Obi-Wan say to Luke, don't go try to save your friends. You're not ready for that yet. You need to be more powerful. These are people who we've seen in the past who have told other Jedi they're training to deny their emotions so that they can become balanced and be a better Jedi, effectively, right? Let the Force flow through you instead of letting your emotions dictate what happens with the Force. I think Lucas explored that concept a little bit more in the prequel trilogy, which is primarily a political drama for a lot of reasons, and a character showcasing what happens to Vader himself when his life kind of unravels. But a big part of his life unraveling is his lack of identity and his inability to connect to where he came from. He does not have a father because, as we heard, as they told us, he was created by the midichlorians, along with his mother Shmi. They created Anakin. There is some gray area related to whether or not Palpatine or Plagueis had anything to do with creating Anakin. We don't know that for a fact. We get the one line where Palpatine, when he's still a senator, turns to Anakin and says, some people could manipulate the Force to create life, or prevent death, have power over life and death. And then Anakin is sort of seduced into that power. Little does he know that that's actually going to drive a wedge between him and Padme, and eventually she's going to die from that. So that's a message about selfish ambition and what that leads to. But one of the things that I don't think we have come to terms with is exactly what's going on with that relationship between someone and the Force and the people that they love. Because the original trilogy sort of told us that Jedis were supposed to be in balance, and there's this idea that they're going to be not super focused on their own emotions, but take a step back from those and be more mindful and be more aware, and that they'll be able to be connected to the Force and let the Force work through them in that way. That's sort of like an Eastern mysticism type of thing that George Lucas is dealing with. When it comes to the prequel trilogy, though, it looks like George Lucas is a little bit more critical of the political nature of religion. I would argue that he is specifically criticizing the political nature of Christianity, and when Christianity has become increasingly political, it has a damaging effect on organized religion as a whole, and even our political systems. And in that exploration, though, I think that we get into this dicey area of, well, what is good for a Jedi? Is a Jedi supposed to be removed from intimacy, removed from love in some way, shape, or form? Or is a Jedi supposed to actually be a proponent of love and intimacy? And this is where we get into how that affects Rey, because Disney has taken over Star Wars. It's no longer George Lucas in charge of it. The two stories we've had so far have been very personal. They've told us that Rey's identity is important. They have also started to indicate that perhaps balance is important, but only so that you can do the most loving thing for other people around you. Maybe relationships really are important. Whether or not it's a romantic relationship between Kylo Ren and Daisy Ridley, certainly we want connection between them, right? If it's not romantic, fine. If it is romantic, okay. I'm sure that they can give us rationale for why either of those things is important. But either way, they want to show us that a Jedi should not necessarily be what was encouraged of Jedi previously, especially Anakin, which was to separate yourself from intimate relationships. That doesn't seem to be the case. We already saw a breakdown of that theory to a certain extent with Yoda and Luke, because Luke was basically saying, I have removed myself from intimacy. Isn't that what a good Jedi would do? Because look at all the problems I've caused. And Yoda says, forget the books. Don't pay attention to the books anymore. Trust your gut. And there seems to be an indication that Rey is the furthering of the Jedi Order, because Rey has already gotten past that. Rey is not as concerned with balance and is more concerned with doing the right thing in the right manner, with the motivation of love, right? With the motivation of love for connection, for connectivity, for intimacy amongst people groups. So Rey's identity is really important. It's really important for two reasons. One, they told us it was important in the story, and they told us it was important to Rey. But we also know that it's important to the bigger world, because if she's going to carry on the Skywalker name, Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, why would Rey carry on that name? Now, I was a big proponent of, this is the Skywalker saga. They've introduced Rey. It feels like she might be related to Luke, or at least somehow related to Anakin. They're bringing Palpatine back into it. What can we surmise from those things? You could surmise that Rey is a Force creation, the opposite of what so let's just say that Palpatine did create Anakin. Let's just surmise that that was the case. We could also surmise that, as Snoke says, when someone rises up, when the light side brings someone up, or when the dark side brings someone up, the light side brings someone up to balance it. We can make the assumption that when Anakin was brought up, that was a dark side creation. The light side brought up Luke to counter that. And we could argue that with Kylo Ren going dark side, that the light side has brought out Rey, has created Rey. So if Palpatine was able to create through the dark side, it is theoretically possible that someone could create through the light side, and therefore you might have Rey that way. Doesn't really matter where she comes from as much as it matters her identity and how that identity furthers the Skywalker story. This is the Skywalker saga. I don't think they're ever going to change that. Let's also remember that in the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, those were all George Lucas. When Disney took over, Disney came up with a plan for the rest of the trilogy, for the sequel trilogy. So I don't believe they've changed that plan. That plan is still intact. In fact, it seems like when Disney has a very intentional way of behaving, because when they hire directors that don't really execute the way that they want them to, they remove those directors and bring in somebody else. So it would occur to me that Disney has already had this plan from the beginning, and that Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy are specifically trying to execute a specific type of story. So the story has told us that Rey is really important because Rey is concerned about her background. And then also we care about Rey, and because we want Rey to thrive, but we also care about the Skywalker saga. And this is where I think fans of the sequel trilogy and fans of the original trilogy will be happy with the Rise of Skywalker. Because I think that those two things will coalesce in the last movie. I think that in the Rise of Skywalker, those two things will coalesce. Why do I think that? Well, for one thing, it's called the Skywalker saga. Disney appears to be doing lots of other movies after the Skywalker saga is over with, but they've said that the Skywalker saga will end. Well, it wouldn't be a very good ending if you said 2/3 of the way through the Skywalker saga, you said, well, we're going to introduce new characters that have nothing to do with the Skywalker saga. That wouldn't make any sense. It's the Skywalker saga. People loved the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Although not as many people love the prequel trilogy. But still, people love the prequel trilogy. So the thing is, if you were to abandon what George had done completely, you would alienate this huge part of your audience. That doesn't make any sense to me. But what we did see in The Last Jedi was a deconstruction of a lot of things that we thought we knew about the Star Wars world. We thought that we knew that balance was important. But Luke freaked out so much and removed himself from being intimate that it seems like that was the wrong move. It seems like they're telling us that Luke disconnecting himself from the Force was bad. He says that he failed. Yoda does not deny that he failed. But Yoda encourages him to go train Rey. So Rey is the heir, and I think this is what they're saying in this Empire article, by the way. The writer is saying this. Rey is the heir. So if Rey is the heir, then is she an actual heir? Is she an heir because the light side created her? That's my personal feeling on it. Is that, you know, when she's in the cave and she snaps and you see all of the mirrors snapping? I believe that basically what that is saying is that the Force will create a Rey type character anytime it needs to bring balance. It's basically the opposite of what Plagueis was doing, right? Plagueis was creating dark side, and perhaps even Palpatine, and creating Anakin. And then I think that the Force is creating Rey's to rise up, right? So when that adds up for me for a lot of reasons. One, Kylo Ren has said that she's a nobody. I think that that's true to an extent. Kylo in that moment is not reliable. But I do believe that it's accurate in that saying you're not related to anybody. I think it's also a message that's saying that the Force brings everyone together. The Force is We know that the Force flows in and through all living things. It would make sense if Rey was a Force creation that she would be the heir to the Skywalker lineage, basically, by being created of the Force. And if Anakin was created of the Force through Palpatine, this is the Force balancing out on the light side. So I tend to kind of think that that could be the way that they're going with it. But it also sets up a nice homage to the Skywalkers being so connected to the Force, and then Rey being so connected to them through the Force, but again, not having a father that was Luke or anything like that, or Han or Kenobi or any of them. Her being a Force creation on her own would be really fascinating. And then also, I do believe that they're going to redeem Kylo Ren. I don't think that Reylo is necessarily going to be a thing. I've said that before. I'm not saying anything against Reylo, so if you're a Reylo person, please don't get mad at me. I'm just saying that I think redemption is a core theme in Star Wars. If you can kill younglings and still be redeemed in the end by a family member, I think that Rey, as the heir to the Skywalker lineage, if you will, is going to some way, somehow, some form be able to help Kylo redeem himself. I think it'll probably be, I've said this before, and I know this upsets some people, but I think we could be seeing the last of Rey and Kylo, because I think they might both die in a very Romeo and Juliet type of way. Although I don't necessarily think it's going to be a romantic connection. It may be a romantic connection. I think it actually may be more likely that it is not a romantic connection, but a Force connection, a deep bond, a deep connection of intimacy between the two of them. I don't know. But it is important that we address who Rey is, because we need to know, who are these Skywalkers? Like, who are these Skywalkers? What are they doing? Why does the Skywalker lineage matter at all? And I think we need to come to terms with, you deconstructed, Rian Johnson and the Star Wars team deconstructed a lot of things we thought we knew about Star Wars in some troubling ways. Well, what is the answer to those things? I think the answer was set up by George Lucas. Honestly, it was balance is the answer. Trust your feelings. Oh, wait, remove the feelings from the equation in the prequel trilogy because you're getting too connected to other people. And then the answer is, oh, balance actually means we should have intimacy with other people. Balance actually means that we want to promote the light side more than anything else. And it's all interconnected through the Force. So the original trilogy got it a little bit wrong. The sequel trilogy got it a little bit wrong. But we're going to close out the series by getting it a little bit more right. So I like what they're saying. I like that they're going to address this. I'd be shocked if they said they were not going to address it, because they set it up. Again, they set this up. They foreshadowed this as being a big deal. How is it a big deal? I think it's going to be that the Force is what connects us as family. It connects everyone. That's why we want people to be redeemed back through the Force. And that Rey is perhaps a Force creation. I do not think they're going to reveal her as being an actual bloodline lineage, but rather use this as a means to say we should be intimate with one another. We should work to build intimacy with one another, and Rey is a Force connection to help balance the Force in regards to that particular problem. Again, this is all hypothetical. I know a lot of people like hypothetical. I like to sit back and enjoy the stories as they come at me. But I think that makes the most sense given what we've seen thus far. But I also know that there's a bunch of really good theories out there. I listen to What the Force quite often, and they have a lot of different theories about how Reylo could be a thing. Marie Claire, who's been on our podcast before, and who I'm sure will show up on our podcast or our Star Wars series on the Story Geeks podcast at the end of the year, has some really good things to say about myth and the myths that are involved in creating. I mean, Star Wars and myth go hand in hand because George Lucas was all about myth when he started creating Star Wars in the first place. So I think we're going to see some of those things maybe occur as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think they're going to answer this question of what is Rey? Is she a Force creation? Is she something else? How is it going to relate? Love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment down below and let me know. And if you're a patron of ours, thanks for being a patron. If you're not a patron of ours, I'm doing these kind of things every day. Not always videos, sometimes they're just audio. But if you're a patron, you get access to all of those things. I call it my daily journal. This is one of those daily journals. I hope you enjoy it. Maybe become a Patreon supporter and listen to more of the journals that I have to put out there. Thanks again for watching.